Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with Turkish Stuffed Eggplant. That's right, I'm going to show you how to make Karniyarik. Although in the spirit of full disclosure, I only found out this dish existed like an hour before I started filming. And I didn't really use a recipe and only did about 15 minutes of research. But despite all that, these came out amazingly well. Oh, and by the way, in case you're wondering, the name actually translates to split bellies, which as you can see, or at least will see, is a very accurate name. So with that, let's go ahead and get started by prepping our eggplant. And for this, you're going to need 4 equally sized, hopefully male eggplant. And no, eggplants really don't have genders. But when you're buying these, what you want to look for is eggplant that have small round indentations versus larger, longer slot-like indentations, which tend to have more seeds. So when you're choosing these, remember, you want dots, not slots. And to prep these, what we'll do is pull off the leaves. And then what we'll do next is take our peeler and make exactly 4 peels, equally spaced apart. And this is not just for appearance's sake. Okay, these equally spaced peels are one of the keys to the whole operation. And that's because the peel on the bottom is going to help these sit flat, and the peel on the top is eventually where we're going to split our bellies. And what we'll do once that's been accomplished all 4 is go ahead and transfer those into this baking dish, into which I've brushed in a little bit of olive oil. And then what we're going to do is pop these into the center of a 400-degree oven for about 45 minutes to an hour, or until they just start to soften. Okay, we don't want them too firm, but we also don't want them totally collapsing. So when they're done, they should look a little something like this. And they should feel sort of soft and spongy. But they should not be collapsing when we press them. All right, we're not trying to make baba ganoush here. And then because I probably should have done it when they went in the oven, I decided to brush these with a little bit of olive oil to kind of shine up the outside. And then what we're going to do is let these sit until they're cool enough to handle, at which point we will honor the name and split the bellies. And what we can do while those are cooling is go ahead and make our filling, which I'm going to start by sauteing a large onion in some olive oil in this skillet set over medium-high heat. And as usual, we'll add a nice big pinch of salt. And usually we'll saute these onions until they just start to turn translucent. But here my instincts told me to go a little bit further, until these onions not only softened and started to turn translucent, but also until they started to take on a little bit of golden brown color. All right, for whatever reason, I just thought these should have a little more of a sweeter profile. So that's what I did. I cooked those stirring over medium-high heat until they looked a little something like this. At which point, I'm going to add a pound of ground lamb. And you know the drill. Once we add our meat, we're going to sort of break it up with our spatula into nice small pieces. And we'll continue doing that until it's as fine as we want, and it eventually starts to brown up. And even though I'm using lamb here, I believe beef is also a popular choice. And as far as the technique goes, I really think you could do this with any ground meat. Except, ironically, turkey. I just don't think it has enough fat for something like this. But anyway, no matter what we're using, we'll go ahead and brown up our meat. At which point we'll add most of the rest of the ingredients, including some crushed or finely minced garlic, some freshly ground black pepper, a little touch of ground cumin, or cumin. I also wanted to sneak in a little touch of cinnamon, which I think is always amazing with lamb. Anyway, we will continue on with a touch of cayenne, as well as a pinch of dry rosemary. And speaking of herb, I believe traditionally we're supposed to use some freshly chopped parsley in this, but that didn't happen. And then we will finish this up with a squeeze of tomato paste, which I think you should always buy in tube form, since we typically just need a little bit at a time. And then last but not least, a generous application of salt. Okay, rule of thumb, about a teaspoon per pound of meat. And then of course we will adjust from there. And we'll go ahead and stir all that together and cook that for about 2 minutes to sort of wake up our spices. At which point we can add and stir in our last major ingredient. And that would be a whole bunch of diced sweet and or hot chili peppers. And I used a combination of Anaheim, Poblano, and Fresno. Okay, so I went with an array of mild, medium, and hot. But whatever you're into is going to work, including some just regular old basic bell peppers. And all we're going to do here is cook this for a few more minutes until those peppers just barely get tender. Okay, keep in mind, this mixture is going to cook once we stuff it into the eggplant and it bakes. So we probably don't want our peppers disintegrating at this point. So I just cooked mine for about 3 or 4 minutes, at which point we're simply going to turn off the heat and let this cool down for about 10 minutes or so before adding the final optional ingredient, a handful of finely grated sheep's milk cheese. Okay, I forget the exact name of the one I used, since Michelle bought it, but it was very similar to pecorino. And once that's been stirred in, our filling is basically done. Although if you're a real pro, of course you're going to taste this and adjust for seasoning. And then assuming our eggplants are now cool enough to handle, we can go ahead and split these bellies by cutting directly through the middle of that part we peeled on the top. But don't go all the way through to the bottom. All right, maybe just like 3/4 of the way. And then using 2 spoons, we can kind of pull that apart, which is going to give us plenty of space to stuff in our filling. And by the way, if it's cool enough, this is probably easier if you use your fingers. Unless, of course, you're trying to use a camera and a tripod. Then the spoons are probably easier. And by the way, one of my 4 eggplant was female and did have more seeds. So there you go. And I did scoop some of them out, since they can tend to be a little bit bitter. But anyway, we're going to split and spread open the bellies of our eggplant, at which point we can spoon in our filling. And I actually considered sprinkling some salt on the inside before filling these, but I thought my lab mixture had enough, although in hindsight it didn't, and I could have used a touch more, so something to keep in mind. But anyway, we're going to go ahead and fill these as evenly as possible. And as we do, we kind of want to press it in and pack it down. But be careful, don't do it too hard. Otherwise, these could burst open. And then once stuffed, I decided to decorate the top with some extra pepper strips, which is something I noticed a few people doing during my exhaustive few minutes of research. But of course, this step is optional, so you decide. I mean, you are, after all, the Nelly Furtado of your split bellies bravado. But I did have some extra peppers, and I do think it makes it look nicer, if not more aerodynamic. I wonder how you say racing stripes in Turkish. But anyway, we'll decorate those as we so choose. And then I finished the tops with a little drizzle of olive oil, because it felt right. And then one last thing before we bake these. I'm going to pour in about a cup of chicken broth, so everything stays nice and moist. And we'll have a little something to spoon over later. And that's it. These are now ready to pop back into our 400-degree oven for about 45 minutes or so, or until our eggplant is very soft and tender. Okay, it's really going to depend on the size, so be sure to give it the old poke with a knife to check. And that should pierce the flesh with virtually no resistance. And if it doesn't, put them back in. But mine were perfectly tender. So I went ahead and served up and spooned down some of those drippings. And that, my friends, for a first attempt, did not look too bad. And I'm happy to report the taste and texture were also really good. All right, I'll probably tweak a few things the next time I make them. Like, for example, salting the inside a little. But my eggplant was beautifully tender and creamy, and the filling very flavorful. Although I've since learned since filming, I was supposed to serve this with rice and a yogurt sauce. So I will definitely be trying it that way next time. And probably whip up a batch of our tzatziki sauce. But anyway, all in all, I thought this was very successful. And not just this specific recipe, but the technique in general. All right, as I was enjoying this, I thought up a couple dozen variations I'd love to try. Again, none of which involve turkey. But anyway, that's it. My attempt at making Karniyarik. It's always a lot of fun trying a new recipe for a lot of reasons. First and foremost is that there's really no pressure it has to come out great. And it really is always more enjoyable to cook without fear. Okay, we should all do that more often. So I'm going to go ahead and do a little more research and maybe pick up a few tips in the comment section. But in the meantime, I really do hope you give this a try soon. So head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy. Baba Ghanoush. That's right, not only am I going to show you how to make this fun to say and delicious to eat roasted eggplant dip and spread, but I'm also going to show you how to sex an eggplant. And don't worry, that only sounds inappropriate. But in the kitchen, being able to tell whether an eggplant is male or female is kind of a big deal, since the male eggplant have fewer seeds and are better to cook with. And how you can tell is actually very, very easy. We're simply going to look at the navels, where the stem attached to the eggplant, and if that indentation is kind of elongated, sort of a slot-shaped or slit-shaped, that is a female, as opposed to the male eggplant, which have more of a dot-shaped or round indentation. So we're going to stay away from that shape because that's female and that's going to have more seeds, and we will look for the ones with the rounder indentations. And the way to remember this is with the saying, dots not slots. Hashtag dots not slots. So anyway, just a quick little eggplant buying tip. And just for fun, I ended up getting 3 male and 1 female eggplant, just for a little experiment. And what we need to do before we roast these, besides of course wash them, is prick that skin a few times with the point of a knife. They say if you don't do this, your eggplants will explode. And who needs that? Although they don't really explode, they just kind of split open. But regardless, we'll give them a few pokes with our knife, at which point these are ready to roast any way you want. All right, I'm going to head out to the grill and do mine over charcoal, But this will totally work in a hot oven or even under the broiler. But if it is grilling season, this is the ultimate day after your barbecue recipe. And the reason is, after you finish grilling those burgers or chicken or hot dogs or whatever, generally your coals still have a lot of life left in them. So what I like to do after all the meat's grilled is throw some eggplant down and roast them while that grill's still hot. And that way those are ready to make a beautiful spread out of the next day. It's pretty much the perfect system. So if you know you're going to be grilling, buy some male eggplant and throw them down at the end of the festivities, and you will have something very delicious to eat the next day. But anyway, we're going to roast these eggplant on the grill, and it's a very simple operation in that we're just going to keep turning these, grilling them on all sides, until they basically collapse and get really, really soft. So once they shrivel up and kind of look like this, I'll start poking around, and if I feel a spot that doesn't quite seem soft yet, I will try to maneuver that spot towards the hottest parts of the grill. And by the way, if it means leaning one eggplant against the other to keep it in position, that's totally fine. And once these do finally get soft, you can pull them off. But I do admit I like mine well done. So I tend to leave mine on the grill for a few extra minutes, which is going to result in a little smokier, albeit darker, baba ganoush. So this is how far I took mine. So I'm going to go ahead and pull those off, transferring them into a mixing bowl, because what we're going to do when we head back inside is wrap this in foil and just let it kind of sit and steam there for about 15 minutes. And this is optional, but I feel like it helps transfer that kind of smoky grill flavor throughout the mixture. And then after 15 minutes, what we'll do is we'll unwrap it, and we'll let that cool down until we can handle it, at which point we'll peel off all that skin. Of course, I was totally impatient, and it was still too hot to handle, so I used a spoon to start scraping this into a colander. And by the way, check out all those seeds. Yes, that is the one female eggplant I bought. And it did have significantly more seeds than the male eggplants I bought. But anyway, one way or another, you're going to transfer everything that's not skin or stem into that colander. And like I said, if you're a little more patient and let these cool, you can just peel the skin off the whole thing. And right there you can see one of our beautiful, almost seedless male examples. And then once we've separated all that beautiful, warm eggplant flesh from the skin and stem, I'm just going to set that colander right on top and just let that drain for about 5 or 10 minutes. And once that's drained, we will transfer those perfectly roasted eggplant innards into a mixing bowl where we can mash this and introduce the rest of the ingredients. And if you want, those seed pods kind of stay together. So if you want to pull those out, go ahead. A little bit's not going to hurt you, but a lot of seeds can make the mixture more bitter. So I did pull some of those out, but that will be up to you, and probably a moot point if you buy all male eggplant. So first up, I'm going to add a little bit of crushed garlic, as well as a generous amount of salt. And then before we add the rest of our ingredients, we'll take a potato masher, and we'll use that to mix, mash, and smash this down to something that's pretty creamy, yet still has some texture to it. And some people like to use food processors or blenders and get this completely smooth, but I prefer mine a little bit on the rustic side, as do I think most baba ganoush aficionados. So I mixed and mashed mine till it looked like this, at which point we're going to stop and add the rest of the ingredients. So let's go ahead and squeeze in some fresh lemon juice. And just like every other ingredient in this recipe, totally to taste, I'm probably going to use about 1.5 lemons. And then we want to add a little bit of tahini sauce, but not too much. I'm going to start with about 2 or 3 tablespoons, and then if I want more, I'll add more later. And you want to be a little careful, because if you use too much, instead of making a baba ganoush, you're going to make a slippery hummus, which is not what we want. We're also going to do a little shake of cayenne. Raise your hand if you're surprised. As well as some extra virgin olive oil. Something on the fruity side would be perfect. And then what we'll do is we'll switch to a whisk and give this a very good mixing, which is not only going to incorporate everything very nicely, but what's going to happen is some of the most fibrous parts of the eggplant that were located around that stem section, those are actually going to get wrapped around the tip of the whisk. And when we pull it out, that's going to come with it. All right, can you see that? So that was some classic multitasking right there. And that's pretty much going to be it, except for one secret ingredient. I'm going to stir in a little bit, just a couple tablespoons, of plain yogurt. It's an old trick a Lebanese friend taught me. So I'm going to stir that in, and technically at this point our baba ganoush is done. But it is not even close to being ready to serve. Very critical, we have to wrap this up and chill it completely before the final seasoning. Because right now it's basically room temperature and it's impossible to taste all the flavors, which have not even fully developed yet. So what we want to do is wrap this up and pop it in the fridge for 3 or 4 hours or until completely chilled, at which point we can pull it out and then do the final seasoning. Okay, so at this point my baba ganoush is ice cold, and we'll unwrap it and give it a stir and taste for seasoning. So I went ahead and I adjusted mine with more cayenne and salt. Like most vegetable dishes, this needs a good amount of salt, and an undersalted baba ganoush is a horrible baba ganoush. And then besides the cayenne and the salt, I also like to finish with a little bit of fresh herb, which includes a tiny amount of fresh mint that was literally 1 leaf, as well as a nice big pinch of Italian parsley, and we'll stir that in, And that could be it. But just to be sure, we're going to taste again and adjust if necessary. You are the Lyndon LaRouche of your Baba Ghanoush. And speaking of brainwashing, if there's one thing I want to make sure I meld into your minds, it's never serve anything that you haven't tasted first. All right? And then once we are happy with the seasoning, we can go ahead and transfer that into some kind of serving vessel. And because the texture is what some people would describe as aesthetically challenged, we will distract the eye with some spoon-based indentations, also known as spoon dentations. And then, as is customary, we will finish with a drizzle of olive oil and a little more Italian parsley. And that's it. Our Baba Ghanoush is ready to Baba Ganache. And I'm just going to serve mine with some toasted pita triangles. And are those homemade or store-bought? Ooh, I'll never tell. All right, fine, they're from the store. But who cares about the pita when you have this amazing roasted eggplant spread? Just so tasty, so savory, so delicious, and yet actually very, very light. And like I said, if you can manage to roast these over a charcoal fire, it's going to be that much more delicious because you're going to get that little bit of smokiness in the background that really brings us all together. But anyway, that's it. Baba Ghanoush, a very simple and very delicious eggplant spread. Plus, you also learned how to tell if an eggplant is a male or a female. I mean, even if you don't cook, vegetable-based trivia like that is casual cocktail party conversation gold. All right, so you got that going for you. But anyway, eggplant gender aside, I really do hope you give this delicious spread a try soon. So head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy. Baked eggplant sandwiches. That's right, I got a few requests for fried eggplant for like Super Bowl appetizer type stuff, which reminded me of this amazing baked eggplant sandwich that I hadn't made for years and years. And while it's not exactly fried eggplant, it is superior in that it's stuffed with salami and cheese. So let me show you how to make these. They're a little bit messy to prepare, but very easy and totally worth it. Step one, we're going to slice up some eggplant. A 1/4 inch is probably too thin, a 1/2 inch probably a little too big, so just under a 1/2 inch, what's that, 3/8? I should have showed you this using a ruler, but I was afraid someone would walk into the kitchen while I was measuring an eggplant. That's a bad look. So nice thick slices, just like that. And I know a lot of people like to salt their eggplant slices to draw out the bitter liquid, and then they rinse them and dry them. We're not doing that. Not necessary, okay? And you can read about that on the blog too, but just slice them up. So once your eggplant's cut, you're going to grab a slice. You're going to match it with the slice that was next to it. Because we're making little sandwiches, we want these to be as close in size as possible. And yes, because an eggplant's tapered, some of these sandwiches are going to be a little larger than others. They all should be the same thickness, which is the important part, but sizes will vary. It's all part of the fun. Once you have your eggplant all paired up, on the bottom slice, you're going to put a 1/4 slice of provolone cheese, 3 thin slices of salami, all right, another 1/4 slice of provolone, and we're intentionally placing the cheese just in the middle. That will slowly spread out as it cooks, so we don't want it near the edge. You're going to top that with the top half of the eggplant, and that one's prepped. All right, so once more with feeling. It's eggplant, cheese, salami, cheese, eggplant. All right, very simple. And by the way, you do not want to overfill these. I know it doesn't look like much in there, but it will be the perfect proportion. You'll see. Unlike most things in life, restraint is important here. Okay, so don't overstuff these. So once all your eggplant sandwiches are built, you are ready for the old classic breading station, which is seasoned flour. All right, read about that on the blog. Beaten egg, and some very fine breadcrumbs. I guess you could use panko for this, but I've always used the traditional fine dry breadcrumb. All right, you're going to take one of your sandwiches. You're going to dip it in the flour on both sides. All right, make sure it's coated generously. Shake off the excess. You're going to dip it into your egg mixture. All right, again, make sure it's coated perfectly. All right, breadcrumb does not stick to flour. It loves to stick to eggs, but not to flour. So make sure that's coated well. All right, place that in your breadcrumb pan. And I like to use a spoon to spoon over the breadcrumbs so I keep at least one of my hands dry. All right, press that in firmly. Shake off the excess. And then we're going to place those on a foil-lined baking sheet. But before we do, you want to drizzle down a little bit of olive oil. All right, a couple teaspoons just like that. Roughly the size of the eggplant sandwich. Place it down. And then drizzle over about the same amount on top. We're going to finish that with just a little bit of grated Parmesan cheese, very finely grated. All right, just a little dusting on each. And then what's going to happen, we're basically going to fry these in the oven at a high temperature, 425. And what we'll do is we'll do 10 minutes on this side. We'll flip them over, put some more cheese on, give them 10 minutes on that side, and they should be perfect. All right, let's test my theory. So they go in for 10 minutes. All right, we're going to flip them over. That cheese should have glued both sides together, but be careful when you flip it. and you'll see those are starting to brown nicely. And I'm doing this without a lot of oil. The Italians I learned this from used way more oil, but I don't think you need a ton. All right, so you're going to flip those over. You're going to dust that side with Parmesan cheese. We're going to put those back in the oven for another 8 to 10 minutes until they're well browned and the eggplants cooked through. Look how gorgeous those are. And yes, you may have a little bit of cheese that drips out the side. That's totally normal. All right, the French call that leakage du fromage. All right, and it's nothing to be afraid of. Once they come out, I usually flip them over. The other side should be a little browner. By the way, any of the cheese that did drip out, just push up against the sandwich. It will stick to it, and when it cools, you will have bonus caramelized cheese remnants attached to your sandwich. Always a delicious addition. All right, I'm going to transfer those onto a cooling rack, and then very important, listen to me now, but hear me later. These are not supposed to be eaten hot. These are not even supposed to be eaten warm. These are intended to be eaten room temperature. Why? It's an Italian thing. But once they're cooled down to room temperature, go ahead and throw that on a plate. Maybe you're serving it as a lunch with a little salad and some olives. Maybe you're going to cut these in half and put them on a tray for a party. All right, very versatile and incredibly tasty. Look at that. That slightly crunchy outside, that soft, earthy, moist eggplant. And what's not to like about provolone and salami? Nothing. Those things are always delicious. All right? And you can see there, even though we only put a few thin slices, we have plenty of filling. And of course, obviously, you can use this exact same technique and fill these with whatever you want. Just do not overstuff. That's really the key. Anyway, like I said, a little bit messy to make, but not hard at all. And the payoff is very, very worthwhile. All right? So I really hope you give these a try. Head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy. Eggplant bacon. That's right, we really should have called this bacon-flavored eggplant. But quite frankly, eggplant bacon will get more hits. So as a little bit of a compromise, we put the word bacon in quotations, which I believe means I can't be sued. Again. But forget about what we're calling this. The important thing to focus on here is how surprisingly well this came out. And no, not really as a bacon substitute, but really more of a fun, delicious way to eat eggplant. So with that, let's go ahead and get started with what I'm going to call the bacon brine. And this is basically going to contain the same things that turn pork into bacon, which are, of course, salt, sugar, and smoke. And for our salty elements, we're going to start with something called tamari, which is a beautiful type of soy sauce that's made with 100% soybeans, instead of the usual combination of soybean and wheat. But anyway, we'll do some tamari or soy sauce. And then we're also going to add a little splash of Worcestershire sauce. And that's pretty much going to take care of our salty, which brings us to our sweet. And as far as the sugar goes in this, we're going to go with some maple syrup. And normally at this point I would tell you to use grade B, but apparently that's not a thing anymore. Now it's called something like grade A robust. But either way, we'll go ahead and add some maple syrup before seasoning this up with a very generous amount of freshly ground black pepper. We'll also sneak in a little pinch of garlic powder, as well as a nice big spoon of smoked paprika. And then for a little bit of heat, which is always neat, we'll add a pinch of cayenne. And we'll take a whisk and go ahead and give that a mix. And then what we're going to do next is introduce a couple tablespoons of olive oil, but we want it to sort of emulsify in, which means we want to kind of drizzle it in slowly while whisking. And to make that easier, what we sometimes do is make a little ring out of our towel. And what that does is help keep that bowl stable so we can whisk with one hand while drizzling our olive oil in with the other, and we don't have to worry about that bowl moving around too much. So we'll go ahead and whisk in a couple tablespoons of oil as shown. And then last but not least, one optional ingredient, a little bit of liquid smoke if you want. So I am going to dump in a little bit, because I do think it makes it taste more like bacon. But be very careful, that stuff can be overpowering. So if we're using it, we'll mix in a little bit of that. At which point we can set that aside and start in on prepping our eggplant. And preferably a male eggplant, which as you may know, we can identify by checking the mark where the flower was attached. And what we're looking for is a small dot versus a long slot. And what that indicates is that you're dealing with what they call a male eggplant, which is going to have a lot less seeds. And what we'll do to prep this is go ahead and cut off the end, and then we will cut this in quarters before slicing in hopefully approximately the same thickness as a slice of bacon. And for this operation, I highly recommend one of these vegetable slicers. Yes, you do have one. You probably forgot about it. It's in the pantry somewhere. So if you don't already have one of these mandatory pieces of equipment, I would say this recipe is the perfect excuse to get one. So I'm going to go ahead and slice up that eggplant, which is super easy on one of these things. It's also super easy to slice off your fingertips. So be careful and theoretically use the finger guard, which of course I always do. And then all we have to do once our eggplant is sliced is simply dip it into our mixture, making sure it's thoroughly coated, and then maybe wiping off a little bit of the excess before transferring it onto a parchment paper-lined baking sheet. And by the way, even though I stole this recipe, this is my big improvement on the method, because all the other techniques for this I saw called for brushing our mixture onto the eggplant, which I did the first time I made this, and it took forever. So I thought to myself, they're tripping, I should be dipping. Which, by the way, is exactly how that thought popped into my head. But anyway, that's going to be up to you. You are, after all, the Swiss beats of your faux meats. And speaking of on to the next one, once we have all our slices dipped and arranged on our sheet pans, we're going to go ahead and transfer that into a 225-degree oven for, in my case, 45 minutes, which according to most online recipes should be enough time for this to be done and crispy, but it's not. After 45 minutes, they were still very soft. So what I decided to do, because I still had a little bit of our bacon brine in a bowl, was give those a little extra brushing. And then I went ahead and put those back in the oven, but this time at 250. Mostly because I was getting impatient. Which, by the way, is probably how I'll start them next time. And we'll continue at 250 until the eggplant is crisp and very bacon-like. And I would say that it's not a bad idea that at some point during the cooking time, you pull these out and flip them over. And above and beyond that, once you get towards the end of the cooking, be careful, because some are going to finish before others. See, I think this one was a little thinner than the other slices. And even though the other ones were still a little bit soft, this one seemed crispy and ready to enjoy. So that's what I did. And how was it? Actually, I'd rather not say. We're not to the official tasting yet. So I popped those back in until those pieces got nice and crisp and looked something like this. Check it out. I'm always blown away by how similar this smells and looks to bacon. So I think this stuff more than passes the nose and eye test. But what about the taste? Well, that's where we have to talk about your expectations. If you take a bite of this and think of it as a replacement for bacon, you'll probably be a little disappointed. Since it's a vegetable and not pork, it clearly will not taste exactly like bacon. But despite that, it does have a baconish flavor and is very enjoyable to eat. So I think it's a mistake to think of this stuff as something you'd eat instead of bacon. The way you really should be thinking about this stuff is that it's something to eat instead of eggplant. But of course, since we are calling it bacon, even though it's in quotations, I needed to test it with some eggs. And I'm very happy to report it worked quite nicely. I mean, since I'm not allowed to eat bread anymore, I usually dip my bacon into the eggs. And this worked out almost as nicely. Except it wasn't bacon. Which, as we just discussed, is fine. Remember, we're not trying to replace bacon with eggplant bacon. We're trying to replace eggplant with eggplant bacon. Okay? Oh, and in case you're wondering how this would be used on a BLT, well, I actually tried that with an earlier batch, and it was shockingly good. So I really do hope you give this a try soon. Head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy. Eggplant Escabeche. That's right, if you've ever been sitting around thinking, I wonder what Chef John's second favorite eggplant dish is. Well, this is it. And it would be number one if it wasn't for fried eggplant. And while I generally introduce these videos telling you how easy they're going to be, that's really not the case here. While very simple, I would not describe this as an easy recipe, since there are a bunch of ingredients to prep and a fair number of steps. But once this is finished, and you're enjoying it on some grilled bread, all that effort will more than make sense, as this is one of the most delicious things you'll ever taste. So let's go ahead and get started with our veggies. And there we can see the star of the show, one large eggplant. And then I'm also going to be adding a zucchini, because I had one to use up. And then lastly, we'll also be adding some fire-roasted chilies. So let's go ahead and start with our eggplant. And what we'll want to do is cut off the ends. And of course, we're going to use a male eggplant, because they have less seeds. And how you can tell is, of course, looking for that round marking. That's a male. Remember the hashtag, dots, not slots. And if you have no idea what we're talking about, I will explain on the blog post. But anyway, we're going to trim off the ends and then peel the eggplant, but not totally. Okay, for appearance sake, I do like to leave a little bit of the skin. Some people leave it all, but it's a little tough. So for me, this is the best of both worlds. But how much to peel is going to be up to you. You are the Rachel Ray of your escabeche. And then what we'll do once that is fully or partially peeled is cut it in half lengthwise, and then turn it and cut it across into hopefully evenly sized pieces. Probably something close to 1/4 inch. As you all know, the exact size is not the biggest deal. The big deal is you pick a size and stick with it so these cook at the same rate. So we will go ahead and slice up our eggplant and transfer that into a nice large bowl. And then we'll do the exact same thing with our zucchini. And that one we'll slice at a little bit of an angle to make those pieces a little longer. And then what we need to do once our veggies are prepped is toss them with a couple tablespoons of kosher salt. And I would say this is probably the most important step, because what's going to happen is we toss these vegetables with the salt. It's going to draw out moisture, which is going to do three things. It's going to improve the texture, it's going to concentrate the flavor, and it's going to remove some of the bitterness. So what we'll do is we'll toss those very thoroughly, and then let them sit out at room temp for 15 minutes. And you'll see as those sit, they're going to kind of soften up and get very, very damp. And they're actually going to look like they're sweating, which is okay. That's what we want. So like I said, we'll let those sit for 15 minutes. And while we're waiting, we'll go ahead and mix up our garlic oil, which not surprisingly starts with 2 or 3 cloves of finely crushed garlic, to which we will add some dry oregano. We'll also add some fresh later, but we do want some dry here as it's one of the signature flavors. And then we also want to add a healthy dose of chili flakes, although you can tell from the seeds I'm getting down to the bottom of the jar. Don't worry, I'm going to add a little more later. And then last but not least, we will add our olive oil, and we'll give that a mix with the whisk. And that's it, we can just set that aside until needed. And at this point, we'll go back and check our veggies, which have been sitting out for, like I said, 15 minutes. And what we'll need to do is transfer these now pretty wet vegetables into a strainer, because we need to take them over to the sink to rinse off the salt. So we'll go ahead and place those under some nice fresh cold water, and we will rinse off that excess salt, which has served its purpose. And even though we're rinsing the excess salt off, you'll be surprised how much is absorbed by those vegetables. Okay, we'll probably add a little bit of salt later, but even with the rinsing, these are pretty much fully seasoned. And then what we'll do once those are fully rinsed is let them drain while we set up our vinegar mixture. So into a saucepan, we will add 1 cup of white vinegar. And I'm actually using a blend here. I'm doing half a cup of champagne vinegar, and then half a cup of regular white wine vinegar. And then to our vinegar, we'll also want a splash of water. And that's it. That's the mixture we're going to blanch our veggies in. So let's head over to the stove and bring this up to a boil over high heat. And as soon as that mixture comes to a boil, we'll go ahead and add our vegetables. And I know it doesn't look like there's enough liquid to cook these, but there is. Because as you'll see, these really do collapse and shrink down. So what we'll do is we'll add those veggies in and then quickly cover this. And we're going to cook this for about 5 minutes or until our pieces of eggplant go from something that's kind of firm and white to something that's more soft and translucent. And no, that's not the lid that goes with this pot, but I'm using this one because it's see-through. And what I like to do is let that go for about a minute before giving it a stir. And you can see those veggies are already softening. And then I'll cover it back up, let it go for another couple minutes, give it another stir, and by the second mixing, there should be just enough liquid to cover. Almost. And then we'll cover that back up and go for another couple minutes, for a total cooking time of about 5 minutes or until your vegetables look a little something like this. And as soon as we've determined our veggies have gone long enough, we'll remove those from the heat and transfer them into a strainer, where we will let those cool down to room temp. But do not discard that cooking liquid, because we're definitely going to add some of that back in. All right, so our eggplant and zucchini are prepped, and we can move on to fire roasting our peppers, which I like to do over a fire. And this time I went with 2 red Jimmy Nardello peppers, as well as 1 green hatch chili. Oh man, people go crazy for the hatch chili. I never really figured out why, but I don't say too much. Let them have their fun. But anyway, we're going to fire roast those peppers. And we've demoed this before, so I'm going to kind of fast forward. But basically, we're going to char off that skin and soften and sweeten those peppers. And then once those are thoroughly charred and cool enough to handle, we will scrape off that charred skin. And yes, we're also definitely going to remove the seeds. And we'll go ahead and slice that up any way we want. I'm going to do some short little strips here, but a dice is also nice. So I sliced up my hatch chili and my 2 Jimmy Nardellos, or Jim Nardello, as its friends call it. And then once our peppers are set, we can move on to final production. So to our bowl of drained eggplant and zucchini, we will add our sliced peppers, along with about a 1/4 cup of that vinegar cooking liquid. We will also at this point add some fresh herb. In 2 forms, we'll do some freshly chopped Italian parsley, as well as some fresh oregano. And then we'll go ahead and finish this off by transferring in our garlic oil mixture. And please use a spatula. You want to get every drop of that stuff. And then what we'll do is give this a gentle but thorough mixing. And once we've done that, we'll give it a little preliminary taste for salt. As you know, we won't do final seasoning until this is ice cold. But I could tell it needed a little bit, so I did add a little more salt here, along with a little bit of freshly ground black pepper, because I saw it sitting there and I hadn't used it yet. So we'll mix that up. And if you were ready to eat this right now, I have some terrible news. We really need to pop this in the fridge to let those flavors develop. So what we'll do is wrap this up and pop it in the fridge for at least 6 hours. At least 6. I really think you should do it overnight, but at least 6. So I actually ended up letting mine sit in the fridge for about 8 hours, at which point we can pull it out and move on to the final touches. So first up here, we'll give it the old toss and taste. So we'll give it a mix, we'll give it a taste, because now that it's ice cold, we can really tell what it tastes like. So I decided mine needed one last pinch of salt, as well as a little more chili flake, without as many seeds. And then above and beyond final seasoning adjustments, the last thing I like to do is add a little bit of vegetable oil to this. Okay, not olive oil, just a little bit of canola oil or something like that. And what this does to the appearance is give it a little extra shine, since cold olive oil is a little bit cloudy. So as almost everything in this, that's optional, but I do it. And if you want to be just like me, you will too. And then once that's mixed in, finally, our Eggplant Escabeche is done. And while it looks like those vegetables are horribly overcooked and soft and mushy and mushy, they are not. They are surprisingly toothsome, not to mention incredibly flavored. So let's go ahead and serve this up by transferring it into some kind of glass container. And while I will fully admit this doesn't look like the most beautiful stuff in a mixing bowl, as you can see by transferring it into some kind of clear glass jar like this, it gets significantly more gorgeous. So I'm going to go ahead and fill up this clear sealable jar and top it off with a little more olive oil, just because. And then once we have that looking just like we want, we'll transfer that next to some toasted bread. And yes, extra credit if you do it on a charcoal grill. And then for a final touch, because my oregano is blooming, I added this beautiful flowering sprig. Although you know what, it could have been marjoram. Not sure, but close enough for YouTube. And that's it, our escabeche is ready to enjoy. So let me go ahead and pile some up on this grilled piece of bread, using a cocktail fork, which proven scientific fact makes everything taste better. And that, my friends, is just an insanely delicious, shockingly addictive bite of food. You can sort of describe this as pickled vegetables meet marinated vegetables, but that's not even remotely close to doing it justice. I would go with the flavor explodes in your mouth, but that's just such a cliche and borderline inappropriate sounding. So let me just finish up by saying this. I know people that hate eggplant, loathe eggplant, and even those people love this. Of course, I don't tell them it's eggplant, but still, the point is, they love it. So sure, it's a little bit of work, and there's a few steps, and you have to wait hours to eat it. But despite all that, I'm pretty confident you will have no regrets. That is just how amazing this stuff is, okay? So I really do hope you give this a try soon. Head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.
Mini lamb meatballs in a spicy eggplant tomato sauce. Now you know I love lamb, and once in a while I enjoy it in small, spherical portions. So we're going to start the sauce first, because that's going to simmer for a little while. I'm going to take one eggplant, top and tail it, peel it, and then I'm going to cut that in like 1/4-inch cubes, maybe 1/2-inch cubes. If you can't decide, go 3/8 inch. Alright, once that is cubed up, I'm going to throw it in a saute pan with a little splash of olive oil, a big pinch of salt, and I'm going to cook that on medium-high heat until the eggplant starts to collapse. Alright, see that? It gets a little soft, then it gets a little softer, and then it looks like that. Alright, at that stage I'm going to add my minced onion, give that a stir, and you know what? It's called a spicy eggplant sauce. So I'm going to put in some red pepper flakes. Never a bad idea. Alright, give that a stir. I'm going to reduce the heat to medium, and I'm just going to cook that until the onions soften, maybe 3 or 4 minutes. At that point I'm going to add my tomato sauce and some chicken stock. Alright, I'm going to lower the heat to medium-low and simmer that while I make my meatballs. Okay? So very simple sauce. If it looks like it's getting too dry while you're doing the meatballs, add a splash of stock or water. And if you're making the sauce ahead of time, I would say simmer it at this point for about a half hour and then reserve it and then finish the recipe as shown. Alright, on to the meatball mixture. I'm going to take 1 large egg, a rounded tablespoon of plain Greek yogurt, and then some plain breadcrumbs, and I'm going to whisk that together. And that, in old school culinary terminology, is called a slurry. So slurry is not a great word, but you got to admit it's better than wet bread. All right, we're going to spice this up with some cumin, some cinnamon, some coriander, of course salt, of course black pepper. I'm also going to throw in some garlic and some very finely minced onions. Because we're not sauteing those, they got to be really, really finely minced. Okay? I'm going to crumble in my lamb. I'm going to give it a mix. Now, normally I would use my hands, but I'm, working a camera, so I didn't want to get all dirty. But you can use your hands, no problem. At this point, I was like, hey, how come you guys didn't tell me I forgot the cayenne? All right, so in went some cayenne. Finish mixing that. All right, now to form these meatballs, I like my ice cream scoops when I make regular meatballs. And it would work for these small mini meatballs if you have a small sorbet scoop like this. But that takes a while. So let me show you a top secret restaurant trick. You take a handful of meatball mixture and you squeeze it up through your forefinger and thumb. See that? So you just kind of extrude it. So your hand is basically acting like a pastry bag almost. Slowly squeeze your other 3 fingers and it will force the meat up through like that. Pretty cool, huh? Either way, once you get those portioned, we're going to roll those with wet hands like we always do with meatballs. Once those are all nice and round, we're going to put that in a hot oven. All right, 450 degrees for 10 minutes, just to give those a little color. They're going to go into our simmering sauce, which I'm now going to turn down to low. And I'm going to simmer that for about a half hour, 45 minutes, until I'm happy with it. Now, if you want it thick like I like mine, let the liquid reduce. If you want to keep it a little saucier, add a little stock. That's up to you. That's what we call, let's see, what word am I looking for? Cooking. That's you cooking. You decide those things. All right? That's half the fun. All right, to finish, I'm going to chiffonade some fresh mint. Here's the gratuitous chiffonade demo. Roll it up, slice it thin. I'm going to turn off my heat. I'm going to add that fresh herb. Of course I'm going to taste for seasoning. Salt, pepper, spice, etc. All right, make it taste good. And that's it. I'm going to serve mine on some rice pilaf. Look at that. So delicious. Those beautiful lamb meatballs, the garlic, the aromatic spices. All right, that delicious tomato eggplant sauce. A little bit spicy, a little bit sweet. Really, really nice. So simple, kind of exotic, possibly erotic. I don't know. You tell me. But anyway, I really hope you give that a try. All the ingredients are on the site as usual. And as always, enjoy.
Eggplant Parmesan, or at least my version of an eggplant parmesan, kind of in a casserole form. I really like this recipe, really easy, and it's a lot less calories than the traditional fried eggplant parmesan. So I got 2 eggplants. I'm going to cut off the bottom because what I want is about 5 slices from each. I want 10 slices total, but I want them as wide as possible. So 1/2-inch slices from the thickest part of the eggplant. And there you go. Now, with the skinny ends, I'm not going to throw it away. I'm going to trim the skin off, and then I'm going to dice that, and I'm going to use that in our sauce, which is going to make it extra tasty. So it's kind of eggplant parmesan with eggplant sauce. It doesn't get any more eggplanty than that. All right, so I got that diced in a hot saute pan with just a little bit of oil. I'm going to soften these slices of eggplant with a little bit of salt, about 3 or 4 minutes per side. I'm not really trying to cook them all the way. I just want to kind of soften them a little bit because you'll see what's going to happen here. And I'm only going to use a tiny bit of oil. Eggplant will soak up 17.4 times its own weight in oil. That's why the deep fried eggplant parmesan has like 40,000 calories per serving, because eggplant is just like a sponge when it comes to oil. So once those are cooked on both sides, lightly browned and softened a little bit, I'm going to take those off and put them on a paper towel. All right, so all the eggplant got done. I'm going to take my saute pan. I'm going to add some olive oil. And I'm going to throw in a couple cloves of sliced garlic, not chopped, not minced, sliced. And because that oil is nice and hot, it's only going to take about 10 seconds here. And I'm going to dump in my diced eggplant. I don't want the garlic to burn. I'm going to throw in a big pinch of salt, a little red pepper flake, and I'm going to saute that for about 5 minutes. All right, after about 5 minutes, I'm going to dump in my tomato sauce, a little bit of water, give that a stir. I'm going to turn the heat down to medium-low. And I'm just going to cook that for about 15-20 minutes until that eggplant's nice and tender and everything is delicious. Now, if you need to, while it's cooking, see if it starts getting thick like that, you're going to add a little water to keep it a nice saucy consistency. See, that won't happen if you do it in a saucepan, but why dirty 2 pans? So things evaporate a little quicker in the big saute pan, so just adjust with water. Now for my stuffing. Yes, my eggplant parmesan has stuffing. I'm going to take some ricotta cheese,
some grated Parmesan, and some grated pepper jack cheese. I'm not a big mozzarella guy with this recipe. I like the pepper jack, a little more flavor. Some black pepper, some salt. And I'm going to mix that up. So really, really basic, simple, delicious cheese filling. And that's it. All right, now, the eggplant has cooled. All right, I had it sitting on paper towel, so a lot of that moisture has soaked into the towel. I'm going to divide my cheese mixture between the 10 slices. It's going to be a couple tablespoons each. And then I'm simply going to fold them like a taco. See that? Don't worry how it looks. It's going to look great when it's cooked. So we're going to fold those over. Again, I have 10 pieces. In my small casserole dish, I'm going to put half that eggplant tomato sauce down on the bottom. I'm going to lay in my folded over stuffed eggplant slices. Look at that. That looks so good already. All right, I'm going to pour over the rest of my tomato mixture. Tap it down in all the cracks and crevices. All right, and then we need a crispy topping. So I'm going to take some breadcrumbs, lots of Parmesan cheese, which is going to help it get nice and crunchy, and olive oil, of course. All right, we're going to mix that up. I'm going to pour that over the top of the casserole, and I'm not going to pack it. All right, I'm just going to spread it around with the tip of my fork so it's kind of irregular. That's going to go in a 375-degree oven for about 35-40 minutes. You can put a piece of foil on top if it's getting too dark, but you want to make sure it's bubbling, which means it's going to be cooked inside and underneath. You want the eggplant to cook. There's nothing worse than raw eggplant. That cheese is going to bake. That delicious eggplant sauce is going to permeate everything. The crispy breadcrumb Parmesan topping is going to give it a nice crunchy texture. So you're basically going to get the same texture and flavor as a traditional eggplant Parmesan, but like way less oil. Because like I said earlier, when you fry breaded slices of eggplant, they soak up an unbelievable amount of oil. So here the crispiness is just on top, and it's really a nice version, I think. Give it a try, you tell me. All the ingredients are on the site, and as always, enjoy.